This is the 5-minute sample for Fire from the Sea, a male-to-male dragon shifter romance by Noah Harris and Rowan Porter. This is my 11th audiobook, and it released on April 15th, 2019. This was my second time doing a shifter romance, but my first time doing one with dragons and serpents instead of wolves. And let me tell you, having to describe a guy turning into a dragon is an experience no person should go without. People didn't really seem to like my narration on this one, even though I thought for sure that they would while I was making it. The men in it are finally both pretty skinny and lanky like me, and they're not huge slabs of muscle, so I definitely thought that people would associate them more with my kind of voice, and not be bothered by how high my voice is. But I was wrong. One reviewer even went so far as to call my narration sharp and uncomfortable. Now, I don't really mind when people don't like my voice, especially in this industry, that's a given. There's always going to be people who don't like your voice, especially when it's a voice that sounds like mine. Kind of high-pitched, kind of nerdy, I would say, kind of geeky. And why don't I mind? Because there are so many buttery smooth, hunky voices out there that there is no way, if I tried to sound like that I would be able to compete with them. There's literally hundreds of them. And don't even get me started on the innate listenability of British accents. Imagine if I was British and I was trying to record against other British people. I would never do a book. If you have a deep, or even a baritone, British-sounding voice, you can get almost any book you desire. I'll tell you that right now. So I disagree with the adage, if you can't beat 'em, join 'em. I say, if you can't beat 'em, just be yourself. I like to just give people what my natural voice sounds like, and if it gets past the audition phase, like if the author or the rights holder likes it and wants me to do their book, then that's good enough for me. Like, I could be doing nothing. I could be auditioning for years and never get a book. But people take a chance on me. So, how do I repay them? I just be honest. For me, honesty is the best policy. And I'm never gonna pretend to be something that I'm not to try to get more sales or get better reviews. Like, I'm never gonna do that. I'm hopefully never going to be in a situation where I have to compromise, but even if I did, I just would never do it. We only have one life to live, right? So, to all the haters, and to all the people who think my voice is bad, then I say, forget you, right? I'm never gonna pretend to be something that I'm not. As for the book itself, I thought it was okay. Just okay. I'm kind of biased against romances that end with kidnappings, especially when the kidnappings are predictable. You could see this villain coming from a mile away. The instant he was introduced, you were like, okay, he's going to be the bad guy. Now, the reason for why he did the kidnapping was interesting, but it doesn't change the fact that the kidnapping itself was very predictable. And my thing is, why do you need to have an artificial barrier like a predictable mustache-twirling villain who wants the man for himself, when you could just focus on something personal between the two people who are falling in love? Like, I don't know, the class divide in this book is huge. The prince comes from this really long line of ancient dragons, and, what's his name? The other guy, Jaren, is just a regular commoner sea serpent shifter. Like, this is touched on, but it could have easily been the main conflict of the story, instead of the villain just taking advantage of it and him wanting to be with the prince, which kind of dilutes the whole thing down and makes it less interesting. At least for me. It's just my opinion, of course. I'm not saying my ideas are better or anything, but I'm just saying. I'm a very anti-cliche guy, which I'm sure if you've been following my videos, you've noticed by now. So I'm going to bring that up every time. Like, just go for something more emotional, go for something more personal, and it'll end up being more involved and interesting. But I digress. I hope you enjoy this 5-minute sample. Chapter 1. Jaren. This isn't at all how Jaren expected to spend his Friday night. This isn't how he ever wanted to spend any Friday night. Friday nights are supposed to be spent de-stressing from classes and celebrating the survival of another week of college. He's supposed to lounge on the couch in his apartment in his sweatpants, binging on Netflix with his roommates and ordering pizza, sipping on cheap beer and sharing cheap jokes. Friday nights are supposed to be spent lazing around while dreaming about how he'll spend Saturday. Instead, he's spending his Friday night on the long drive home from campus. It's a 5-hour drive, and now, more than ever, he wishes he'd picked a university closer to home. Maybe, if he had, none of this would have happened. He shakes his head. That's a pointless thought. Being closer to home wouldn't have changed anything. It wouldn't have stopped his mom from driving home after work last night. It wouldn't have stopped the other driver from running a red light. Still, he can't help but wonder if maybe something might have been different. If maybe, by being closer, the small things would have changed. She would have left later. She would have caught different lights or gone a different route. He would have at least gotten to talk to her more. He groans as he tosses his head back against the hard and uncomfortable headrest. His eyes burn. They're dried out and sore, and he can already feel them getting puffy. At least he's not crying anymore. He spent the first 2 hours of the drive crying. Hell, he spent most of the day that way too. He'd gotten the call early this morning and had gone through his classes in a daze, his emotional state fluctuating between denial and anger. The grief hadn't hit him until he got in his car to go home. That's when it all suddenly became real. When it all came toppling down on top of him, and he could feel it fill his chest until he broke. Now the tears are all dried up, and he's not sure he has any more to spare. He feels numb. It's a welcome change from the chaos that'd been tearing through his chest all day. Now he just feels empty, like a void resides where his heart had once been. His skin feels too tight, stretched uncomfortably over his ribs. Like those moments in transition between his human and shifted forms. Only it's not his body that's shifting, it's his entire life. Because now, he's lost the only parent he's ever cared about, and suddenly he's the legal guardian of his younger sister. It's a big adjustment, to say the least. A lot more than he was expecting for a Friday night. The drive down the coast is long and boring, just a single highway most of the way. It allows him to zone out, eyes bleary as they focus on the road. He thinks about everything. His thoughts flicker too quickly to really stick. Barely touching one thing before slipping to the next. School. His sister. His mom. His home. His sister. The funeral. His sister. His sister. His sister. He doesn't know what he's going to do. He's barely processed any of it, but he knows there's so much that needs to be done. So many things he doesn't have answers for. So many things he wishes he could have talked to his mom about, asked her about, told her, before she was taken from him so suddenly. One hand on the wheel, his other moves to his neck, fingers slipping beneath the thick black cord that hangs there. He pulls his necklace out from beneath his shirt, slipping it into his hand and pressing his thumb to the smooth divot on its surface. The pendant is larger than his thumb, but smaller than his palm. It's jade in color, with streaks of deep forest green and highlights of seafoam, hard and largely rounded on one end, coming to a point at the other end. There's a divot in the surface, wide and smooth, perfect for rubbing his thumb on. All his human friends think it's simply a jade worry stone, and he lets them assume so. Shifters he meets tend to know better, though they're rarely able to guess where it's from. A scale, yes, though most of them guess a dragon's, given the size of it. He's never touched a dragon's scales, but his mom told him once that they're not as smooth or rounded. Still, he supposes it's a close guess. Sea serpents are close cousins of dragons after all. He rubs his thumb over the scale, letting the smooth, seamless texture of it soothe him. It's one of his mom's scales. She gave it to him when he left home for college as a reminder of family, home, and his true identity. He's worn it every day since. Now, he doesn't think he'll ever take it off. His sister has one too. He remembers her begging for one the day Jaren got his. Now, it's the only physical reminder they each have left of their mom. His chest twists. Pain tightens in his gut, and his lungs feel like they're catching on his ribs. It hurts, but he doesn't cry. His eyes burn, but nothing falls. He's drained, tired, and wants to get home.
A link to purchase Fire from the Sea is in the description below. This title was a royalty share production.
so I make 20% from any purchases. Thanks for listening!